But what I'd like to do at the beginning is just to give you a little context for what it is that the Office of Science and Technology Policy does. My boss, Dr. Holder, who's the president's advisor, science advisor, talks about two basic roles. One is policy for science and technology, so that's things like R&D funding and how does public policy shape the vibrancy of America's innovation ecosystem. And the other is science and technology for policy. So if the president has a question about what does the science tell us with respect to climate change and what do we need to be doing on mitigation and adaptation, or do we have the national technical means to verify a treaty, or what impact is what's happening on in Fukushima going to have in the continental United States. Our job is to mobilize the best science and scientific and technical advice that might be people who are on staff at OSTP, the advisory committees that we have, including the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, the science agencies, or informal relationships that we have, otherwise known as picking up the phone and calling people you know and trust. So that, at a very broad macro level, is what OSTP is charged with. We are organized around 4 divisions. I head up one of them. I head up the Technology and Innovation Division, but I have colleagues who head up divisions on science, on national security and international affairs, on energy and environment. And the Technology and Innovation Division is a team of about 15 people that work on, I would say, one of the core assignments and things that we work on is the development and execution of multi-agency national research initiatives in areas that are what economists would call general purpose technologies, or other people would call platform technology. This is something that's going to have, unlike something that is just going to shape an individual product, these are things that have the potential to have a broad impact on our economy and our society. So historical examples would be the internal combustion engine, the electric grid, the integrated circuit, the internet. And so what are those broad areas of technology that could have a similar impact in the 21st century? And is the government investing enough, particularly in the fundamental research, but also are the mission agencies involved in developing and supporting applications of that technology that are relevant to the missions? So, for example, in June of 2011, President Obama gave a speech at Carnegie Mellon University where he unveiled 2 of these initiatives. One called the Materials Genome, which is aimed at trying to take the advances that have occurred in areas like high throughput materials synthesis and characterization, modeling and simulation, materials informatics, and apply those to reducing the time and cost associated with going from materials discovery to actually making something, which right now, depending on what estimates you look at, is 15 to 20 years. And a lot of the problems that we need to solve, like making the transition to a clean energy economy and reducing greenhouse gases by 80%, a lot of those are at their heart a material science problem. It's not only a material science problem, but a big chunk of it is, whether it's figuring out more efficient photovoltaics or developing new battery technologies that have higher storage densities. So that's one example. Robotics. This grew out of a roadmap developed by the research community, arguing that robotics was really at a tipping point, and that would have broad applicability to our economy and our society. One that the president announced in April of 2013 was the BRAIN Initiative, which stands for Brain Research through, advancing innovative neurotechnologies. And the thesis of this initiative is that one of the reasons we don't understand how the brain works is that we have a missing middle. We can either measure the activity of a very small number of neurons at high levels of temporal and spatial resolution, or we can take a fuzzy picture of your entire brain using a technology like fMRI, but at the level of neural circuits that might be composed of 100,000 or even 1 million neurons, we don't have the ability to understand the real-time electrical and chemical interaction. And so the hypothesis of the BRAIN Initiative was that that goal was within reach, that if we were able to accomplish it, it would lead to new insights about how the brain encodes and processes information, and that in turn would lead to improvements in our ability to diagnose, treat, and prevent diseases of the brain. And Alzheimer's alone, the cost was projected to go from $200 billion a year, where it is today, to $1 trillion by 2050. So if you think research is expensive, the costs of not doing anything about it are astronomical. Big data is an effort that we launched in March of 2012 that was a response to a PCAST report, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, that was looking at the government's portfolio of investment in information technology R&D. And what they said was the current portfolio really reflected the heritage of this multi-agency effort, which was about high-performance computing. And the ambitious goal at that point was to develop a teraflop, which you can now do with your Sony PlayStation 3, I believe. And that was really a key component of the federal investment. And what they said was, high-performance computing continues to be important. Don't stop doing that. But what has happened in recent years is that more and more challenges are becoming not just compute intensive, but data intensive, and not just huge volumes of data. People talking about petabytes and exabytes of data, but an increasing variety of data, uncertain veracity of that data, and increasing volume of velocity of that data, having to deal with real-time or near real-time decision-making. So in a lot of cases, we're listening to the research community. We don't, say in our office, well, gee, I think we should launch a neuroscience initiative today. We're in constant communication with the research community, who, in addition to arguing for across-the-board increases, will occasionally say, here's an area that we think, even in a time of limited resources, is so important that it deserves to be prioritized. And we can't respond to all those, but we try to listen to the research community when they come up with a compelling case that is a little bit more strategic than, please fund my lab. Now, the other thing that we're not only interested in research, but also in STEM education. And we've been working on a number of initiatives with the engineering community, including a group of universities that are working together on something called the Make Schools Alliance. That is, how do we promote making on campus? So some universities are allowing applicants to submit not just their GPA and their SAT scores, but their maker portfolio. Universities like Case Western Reserve are investing in a 50,000 square foot facility called the Think Box. They'll have coffee on the ground floor, design, prototyping, and fabrication space on the middle floors, and an accelerator on the top floor. We are working with engineering deans on an AP engineering design course. As a way of getting the word out in K through 12 about what engineering is. A lot of students, if they've never had any exposure to engineering, how do you expect them to show up at a university saying, I want to be an engineer, if they have no idea what it is. But if they have access to an AP engineering course and that leads to some pre-AP work, then they'll have a better sense for what's involved. The president met with engineering deans and Paul Adelini, the then president of Intel, to talk about efforts to increase the number of undergraduate students that are getting an undergraduate degree in engineering, and in particular trying to work on increasing the completion rate. So a lot of students intend to get a STEM degree or an engineering degree, and they have a difficult time, surviving those first year or two. And I think there's a lot more that we can do to try to increase the persistence and completion rates. We've also been working with the National Academy of Engineering and a number of engineering deans around scaling up things like the Grand Challenge Scholars Program that was started by Duke and Olin and USC, and it now involves a lot more schools. That is allowing undergraduates to organize their coursework, their research, their service learning, their international experiences around one of the 14 grand challenges that has been identified by the National Academy of Engineering. And finally, on the education side, and this also relates to research commercialization, we've been working very closely with the National Science Foundation to scale up the I-Corps program. Show of hands, how many people know what the I-Corps program is? All right, great. So as you know, the idea is pretty simple, that you should apply the scientific method to the entrepreneurial process. And so the way we used to do this is have some faculty member or grad student or postdoc come up with a business plan, and then have them start showing that business plan to an angel or venture investor or a potential corporate partner. And what the thesis of the Lean Launchpad program is that you actually have to go out and talk to some customers. And the I-Corps program requires that participants in the program talk to 100 potential customers. And what they discover is that their initial hypotheses about issues like product market fit, who their customers are, what sort of price they might be able to charge, what their marketing distribution strategy is, who their potential partners are, does not survive first contact with these customers. And that many faculty are reporting that this process is saving them years because they were about to go down a path that would have led to devoting a lot of time and energy to commercializing a product that no one wanted. And only if the faculty member is directly involved in the process are they going to take that feedback from customers seriously. So very exciting results from that program. Faculty who are going through it are getting SBIR funding at 3 times the rate of faculty who are not. And so one of the things I'm very interested in is what could universities do to start scaling that up? So University of Maryland, for example, is now making this part of the curriculum for all of their undergraduate bioengineering students. So they do the Lean Launchpad curriculum in addition to their capstone project. NYU, I think, has 9 faculty now that have been taught how to deliver the Lean Launchpad curriculum. UC Berkeley has totally thrown out the idea of doing a business plan competition and replaced this methodology with this. So I'm very interested in your thoughts about how we might work together to scale this up. So those are examples of the types of projects that we work on. We have a couple of different tools in order to accomplish these goals. The preparation of the president's budget. So the BRAIN initiative, for example, will have an investment of over $300 million in the president's FY16 budget. And that's an initiative that has broad bipartisan support. We also work with Congress on legislation. So we were able to pass legislation that gave every agency the authority to do incentive prizes up to $50 million, and agencies are starting to take advantage of that. We passed legislation that is making it easier for companies to raise capital and go public and improve the environment in the US for starting and growing a business. So that's the second tool that we have. The third tool is to identify things that the agencies can do through executive actions. So for example, the president announced an initiative that Department of Homeland Security will be doing on optional practical training that will make it easier for foreign students that are getting an advanced STEM degree to stay in the United States, and will make it easier for foreign entrepreneurs to come to the US if they want to create jobs. So we always try to identify things that we can do through executive action. And then finally, we try to build coalitions. We try to, once we've identified a goal, to say, how can we work together with the business community, philanthropists, foundations, research universities, elected officials at the state and local level, professional societies, you name it, in what the president calls an all-hands-on-deck effort. So, for example, the president set a goal of preparing and recruiting 100,000 high-quality math and science teachers over the next 10 years. And we now have a broad coalition of over 250 organizations that are either making financial or in-kind commitments to help us achieve this goal. So those are a handful of things that we're up to, but feel free to ask me about commercial space, synthetic biology, smart cities, the use of social and behavioral sciences to improve the way policy and practice work, improving the environment for entrepreneurship, STEM education, because OSTP, along with our agency partners, are involved in a broad range of science, technology, and innovation issues. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you'd have, but I'm even more interested in getting some high-quality free advice. If you had 3 minutes to pitch the President of the United States an idea, what idea would you pitch and why? No pressure.
So I'll start. So you were talking about entrepreneurship and I-Core, which we are now starting to do where we are. The traditional academic model is not built to incentivize faculty to do this.
Right.
And until a higher power than the provosts and chancellors of academic universities see that this should be incentivized by the president, for instance, I don't see it happening. We've had discussions with our new chancellor, who's very aggressive, trying to incentivize this, and it's very questionable as to whether it's going to happen. So I guess I would ask you, how would we incentivize faculty to do this within a traditional academic white power construct?
What percentage of grad students and postdocs get tenure track faculty positions? Anyone? So somewhere between 10 and 20? So I I heard an electrical engineering professor from a university who was saying that the faculty candidates they saw had already gone through 2 postdocs.
Yes.
So, so the question is, if we have a system that is predicated on the notion that all these graduate students and postdocs are going to get tenure track faculty positions at research-intensive universities, and that is occurring for, 15 to 20%, and it may be even lower in some disciplines. Is that a responsible thing to do? I guess that's my question. I mean, don't we have an obligation to A, let them know, and B, say, hey, you might want to prepare yourself for a broader range of career options, because if you look at the numbers, not all of you are going to grow up looking like your faculty advisor. So I understand there may not be incentives, but I just think it's not the right thing to do, not the responsible thing to do, not to prepare grad students and postdocs for a broader range of career options. And in getting involved in the, rather than saying, oh my God, you've disappointed me, I can't believe you're getting involved in industry, to say, that's a legitimate thing for you to do, right? So let me be clear. The president is a big fan of supporting fundamental research. And one of the reasons that we support fundamental research is because we are curious about ourselves and the world around us. And when we're supporting research on why is the universe expanding at an accelerating rate, it's not like we're sitting around saying, well, gee, I wonder what the startup is going to come out of that. But, if you're in electrical engineering and you're trying to figure out what is the next logic device after the limits of silicon CMOS, or you're in material science and you're, trying to figure out how to improve the strength to weight of materials, or you're in, bioengineering, it's not an illegitimate question to say, hey, is one of the goals of putting this research to address a practical problem that we care about, and therefore, if the faculty don't want to do it, then we, at a minimum, we ought to be preparing the grad students and postdocs to do it.
Yeah, so just one follow-up thing on this, and I don't even need a response, but,
Yeah.
the best way, I think, to train young people to do what you're saying is to have mentors to do it. So we can bring in mentors from outside to be their
Yeah.
mentors, but right now, they're natural mentors, which are in the college.
Yeah.
Our faculty members are not incentivized to be entrepreneurial and to set an example for these students. They're incentivized to do traditional academic construct.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's maybe the right answer then is to have some professors in the practice and entrepreneurs in residence, so that you're exposing them to a broader range of mentors.
Nor are they trained, nor may they may not be interested in that. Yeah. Do they have to be interested in discovering how nature works, plus entrepreneurship? Maybe not.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying that everyone ought to become or should become an entrepreneur. What I am saying is that they ought to be prepared for a broader range of career options if only 10, 20% are going to become tenure track faculty. And it just seems like it's malpractice if we're pretending that that is not the case.
So it's not Claire Renack from Case Western Reserve, so thank you for mentioning the
Sure.
So if you're right, it's in a way it's malpractice. Why are we we wouldn't expect people to go to law school for years and years and then not to be practicing lawyers. But we've got NIH telling us now that don't expect that when you finish your 10 years of being a postdoc, that you're going to have a faculty position, and so therefore we have to have a mentoring plan for our postdocs and our graduate students to do something other than be what they've been trained to do in the laboratory, which is to be a scientist or an engineer.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that there are a broader range of career options for a scientist or an engineer than being a faculty member, right? And number one. And number two, I'm not saying that this is all the responsibility of the university. I think the funding agencies have a responsibility as well. So NIH, for example, has a program called BEST, which is about trying to provide some funding at the institutional level to start experimenting with new career options.
So I'll just make one other comment, which is, what I don't think I'm disagreeing. What I'm trying to say is I think we have to change the paradigm of what it means to have a PhD, because we're training them for one purpose and then having to somehow backfill because they're not going to be able to go into to do that purpose.
Right.
8 out of 10.
Right.
9 out of 10.
Right. No, I think that's fair.
Yeah, a number of years ago, there was a book called The Power of Now.
Uh-huh.
And the point of that book was, if you focus on the future, you miss the reality that you're living now.
Yep.
And that's true in science.
Mm-hmm.
This whole conference has been about the future.
Yeah.
But there are things that are happening in the present.
Yep.
Now, the thing that concerns me that's happening in the present is that we use hydrocarbon fuels to propel our automobiles and our aircraft.
Yep.
And that is done by combustion, burning these things.
Yep.
And the demand for students who have expertise in the burning of fuel is enormous. All my students get jobs. The Student Society of Automotive Engineers has 100+ students.
Yep.
The AIAA, the rockets, airplanes. Yet, the funding for professors commensurate with the academic need is not there.
Yeah.
This creates and I've said this before, a disconnect
Mm-hmm.
between our education, industrial needs, and what's available to sustain professors. Because we're looking towards the future at the funding level and not living in the now. So if I had 3 minutes to pitch the president to you, I would say, pay attention to the now, which is we're burning hydrocarbon fuels. We're going to be doing that for a long time. We've got sustained support for hydrocarbon fuel research. There's a lot to be done. And not be looking for something that may be important in 50 years and ignoring the present. That's my pitch. I hope you pass it along.
The president does have an all of the above strategy. He recognizes that, even as we're trying to grow, renewables, and we're still going to require hydrocarbons like natural gas, and so that's why he's been in favor of allowing fracking, but just trying to do it in a way that's sustainable and responsible from an environmental point of view. Yes.
So I think that your point is excellent, but it is something that can't be dictated from the government.
Mm-hmm.
First, the president, with some help, but is there a role for national labs and government labs to play in that? I know there have been some discussions about doing some of these innovation and entrepreneurship type of initiatives at national labs as well. And maybe that is a place where some of the comments can be addressed in terms of pushing the idea forward to other than university jobs and scientist jobs or other options labs would play important role.
But the only trouble with that is that other than the government, there is no economic driver for that. So I think one of the reasons that the sort of entrepreneurship or working for large established companies may be easier to sustain in the long run is that there may be an economic model that supports these positions that is more than just the government continuing to write checks for the national labs. But I agree that they the national labs play an important role in our,
Just as a follow-up, I thought NSFI for type of programs were going to be also
yeah, no, no,
implemented in national labs, and then they could
Yeah.
engage with
Absolutely.
startups and so on as well.
yep, yep. Did you?
Yeah, before I answer this, I probably should look for the exit, because, I think, we have, the answer is not necessarily with the government, but with ourselves. As universities and faculty, we try to, any organization creates people in its own image, So
Right.
we have to be the models for our own students and so on, but often our hiring process really is based essentially on what's the best strategy to get the most funding from the government, not necessarily what's the best, person that we want to, produce. And we ourselves often don't have the background in entrepreneurship or industry experience, so we hire somebody that's been a postdoc twice or 3 times, never been in industry, and then we expect that faculty member to then become an entrepreneur or
Right.
work in industry and translate research into practice and so on. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think part of it is what can government funding do to change the way we do things in industry. In academia, where things change very slowly, one through.
Well, obviously, one thing that has been proposed is that more of the graduate support flow through training grants as opposed to RA-ships. And then there would be some more accountability at the level of the institution. Because, I can see from the point of view of a faculty member, if my self-image is dictated by how many of my, grad students go on to be tenure track faculty members, then I may not be, A, I may not be encouraging them to pursue these other things, and B, I may not be in a position to mentor them. So what that suggests is a need for intellectual diversity on the campus. I bet, it would not be all that difficult for universities to have entrepreneurs in residence who are not, signing up to be there for like 30 years or something like that, but would spend a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Sorry, I was being a little facetious, but I said, aren't those business faculty?
Not necessarily. A lot of business faculty have never worked in a business before. All they do, they're evaluated on the basis of their H factor or whatever, not how much wealth they've created. So, yes,
So I'm going to change this topic a little bit.
yep,
And it's to open access.
yes,
So, so this is essentially an unfunded mandate for all of our faculty, that we represent in the room.
mhm,
Because nominally, in order for any of our publishing vehicles to actually maintain a business model, we have to somehow have a mechanism by which to pay for, ad infinitum repositories for open access, which means that actually typically, for a faculty member to publish an article is actually more expensive in open access than it is in a regular process. But the funding models across all of the government agencies have not taken this into account. So the result is that essentially the government is going to get less for their money by mandating this without taking into account those costs. And I wanted to sort of hear from you sort of what the process was, or looking forward. I know that the lab agencies are coming up against the deadline about how to require open access, whether or not the federal government is going to acknowledge the fact that there are extra costs associated with that aren't in the current model.
So, is your impression that the NIH model supporting PubMed, that worked reasonably well for the biomedical research community?
So I think it works well for the community if they can afford it, right? But so for instance, in a lot of our journals, aside from those covered by by PubMed.
Mhm.
So other agencies that wouldn't necessarily get NIH funding, but would get DOD funding, would get DOE funding, to actually deposit or to have a repository in some peer-reviewed journal mechanism,
Mhm.
typically costs 2 to 3 times more than the traditional page charges, the traditional charge to normal, under the publication model, under the subscriber model,
Mhm.
right? So the subscriber pays versus the publisher pays. So figuring out, there is an extra added cost
Right.
for any of our researchers, faculty, non-faculty,
Mhm.
to actually comply with this new open access mandate, which all the agencies are going to provide guidelines for.
Right.
But part of that is that's going to come out of a flat research budget, which means you get less research for your money.
Right, but we also, I think there are also benefits to having broader access to the research.
Well, again, I don't argue with the concept,
Yeah.
but basically circling through and realizing that that's the feedback,
Yeah,
that's the end result,
yeah,
right? Taking over billions of dollars is actually going to have a real impact on how much research can be funded.
yeah. Okay.
Let me follow up on that then and talk about data sharing, which is another, what's called unfunded mandate. And I was at a DARPA-sponsored workshop last week talking about data sharing in the neurospace.
Yeah.
And, so we came up with some very kind of, small ideas for this, but the big picture there is huge. And I talked with the associate director of NIDR recently and was talking about, they're kind of coordinating this, but there's no uniform plan for data sharing to be implemented across all the funding agencies. And it seems like that's something that would be nice to come out of, your office is a little more guidance to all of them, so we're not having to go through 5, 10, 15 different data sharing plans in order to do what, the federal government's asking of us. And that kind of coordination would be wonderful.
Great. Thanks.
I'll go back to one of the topics that you raised. By the way, I'm a tri-basil, and I serve on the Virginia State Board of Education.
Mhm.
I'm very much encouraged and do like just having an AP course in engineering for the high schoolers. Actually, we need to go a little deeper than that. But one of the, and it will take 3 legs there, of course. One of them is having the curriculum and a syllabus that is appropriate for that the academy and some deans are working on, a dean of engineering too. And the second thing is going to be people who will teach them. And of course, third is the acceptance by the local school boards, just for graduation. That would be one of the requirements. And the bottleneck is actually finding qualified teachers to teach them.
Yeah.
And each state has either no rules or endorsements that do not allow engineers to become teachers, retired engineers or engineers who are interested in teaching. And that is something that I'm hoping is our state is working on, and I think we're about to solve it. If there could be anything from the federal level to encourage other states so that there will be more engineers allowed to teach.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely think we need to look at alternative certification pathways, particularly if you've got a situation where someone is not planning on teaching full time, but would be, teaching a single engineering course. So absolutely, we need to look at, to say, well, you just have a PhD in engineering, but you need to go back and spend 4 years getting a teaching certificate. This is not a reasonable request.
So you were talking about several of the president's initiatives, so that's looking between the president and past. Looking forward, kind of have 2 parts to the question. One is, what are the prospects for the president starting another science and technology thrust in the remaining time he has, and how would we get involved with that? The second thing is I would make a pitch. I think this concept of smart cities is certainly one that should be near the top of the list.
Yeah, no, it's one that we're very interested in because it builds on work that we're already supporting both in cyber physical systems and in big data and data analytics. So that is a real area of interest. A number of universities have started programs in this area already that involve close collaborations with the with the cities that they're in, like University of Chicago, for example. So that is a real area of interest. In terms of new initiatives, the president just announced something in the area of precision medicine earlier this year. I would think that more of our emphasis is going to be on implementation of the ones that we've already started as opposed to a bunch of new ones. But we're always open to new ideas. So if this group wanted to put their head together, you couldn't develop a consensus because otherwise that would be a federal advisory committee. But you could certainly come up with a diversity of ideas. And I should say that one model that I have found to be very useful is the computer scientists have come up with something called the Computing Community Consortium. And they develop roadmaps, they develop workshops with reports, and also they are able to recruit people to work on a 5 to 10 page white paper in a particular area, which is a lot of times, a policymaker is not looking for a 300-page report. And so this is a more lightweight, agile process for generating ideas, not necessarily a consensus, but sort of more of a Chinese menu approach. And then that, if there's a really interesting nugget, that will provoke additional conversations between policymakers and the research community. So I think it's a good model, and it's a model that I would like to see extended to other areas, because I think it would eliminate this notion that you have bottom-up investigator-initiated research, and then you have top-down Washington research initiatives. And I think the best ones are ones that grow out of a conversation between the research community and policymakers. One last question, and then I think we're done for the evening.
I got a last one. You mentioned at the end of the talk that one of the president's initiatives is to encourage international or foreign investment into this country for job creation and so on. My question is, a lot of that initiative is led by local economic development office, such as the city and the state, and the university normally plays a small role. Can you make a comment on how the university can play a more direct or more active role in that?
So what I was referring to is there was originally a legislative proposal called Startup Visa. And the notion was that one of the visa categories that should be available is for foreign-born entrepreneurs who have an idea that's so good that they already have an investor in the United States. We wanted to see Congress pass a law to do that. And we weren't able to do everything that we would have done had Congress passed the law. But the Department of Homeland Security said, well, here are some steps that we can take even in the absence of any legislation. So that's really the focus, is if you have foreign-born entrepreneurs, they've already got an investor in the U.S., how do we make it easier for them to come here and start their business? Thank you very much. Great questions.